go straight over to my next guest, defence analyst, Colonel Simon Diggins. Good afternoon, Simon.
Good afternoon, how are you?
I'm very well, but how do you see the events unfolding in the next couple of hours in the Gaza Strip? Because it looks to be changing by the moment. As I say, 5 minutes ago I was on air and we suddenly saw this most enormous explosion erupt. And it looks like, as promised by Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli response is going to be very severe. Would you imagine an escalation of this bombardment in the hours to come?
I think the Israelis will be thinking very carefully about what's the right targets to hit, bearing in mind we also know that the Hamas terrorists have taken a significant number of hostages into the area as well. It'd be part of their playbook to put hostages in the way of the targets. So one of the considerations, and a very difficult consideration for the Israeli commanders, is to whether or not it's appropriate to hit a particular target. It may be a good military target. What's the danger of collateral damage and accidentally killing their own hostages, or indeed killing too many of the Palestinian civilians as well. So I would say there's probably going to be a cycle of attacks, analysis, rethinking, and then continuing the attacks. And we know in the background there's a full-scale mobilization of the Israeli Defense Forces ongoing. A defense spokesman earlier on today, in fact, the Israeli Ministry of Defense spokesman, said this is the largest mobilization of Israeli forces ever, which is interesting, even greater than the Yom Kippur War. And so I think what we're going to see is responses trying still to clear those areas of southern Israel where there may still be Hamas terrorists in place, trying to get some information on the ground as to where the Israeli hostages have been taken to, and identifying targets. So we would expect to see as a kind of cycle of events rather than necessarily immediate responses.
Yeah, as I say, literally watching a live feed from Gaza Strip, and while you were talking, Simon, another massive explosion erupted. Terrible events are unfolding before our very eyes, literally. Going back to Saturday, the first raid, it was quite dramatic. You know, we saw pictures of paragliders zooming into Israel. They were crossing on the ground as well. We understand considerably over 1,000 soldiers, Hamas soldiers, invaded Israel, and we understand that many of them are still there wreaking havoc. They were going around at one point knocking on doors and just executing people as soon as they opened them. We know that they shot down 260 kids at a pop festival in the south. They've taken all these hostages, as you say. We've heard reports of rape, murder, pillage. I mean, what is Hamas's thought process here? What do they think they're going to get out of this, apart from the most terrible retaliation by Israel, which will cause so much death and destruction? What was their motivation on Saturday, Simon?
I think what it shows is their complete contempt for the best interests of the Palestinian people. They really don't care. They have a particular view of Israel, which basically it has no right to exist, and that all Israelis should be thrown out into the sea. Or, I mean, the kind of language they use, the exterminationist language which they use, is not dissimilar from that used by the Nazis. It literally isn't, and I'm not exaggerating in this respect. So their view is that any Israeli is regarded as a target. They don't accept the distinction between armed forces, personnel, and civilians. As far as they're concerned, the civilians are as bad as the military. But their behaviour is just completely shameful. I mean, disgraceful, murdering, as you say, young people, old people, children, indiscriminate killing. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable. It's a horror, absolute horror that they have perpetrated, and they will be revenged upon.
But is it the case that effectively that's what they want? They want a kind of perpetual conflict, because as far as they're concerned, the only right result is the absolute elimination, the extermination of the Israeli state nation.
I think that's right.
But they know that can't happen, but they'll settle for second best in their view, which is eternal conflict.
I think that's right. I mean, one of the things they've probably been trying to do is scupper some of the very tentative but very profound conversations that have been going on, for example, between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Now, the Saudis are very, very sensitive to the issue of being seen to abandon what this is, an Arab people. On the other hand, they can see the advantages in having an alliance with Israel economically, in terms of security, in terms of counterbalancing the influence of Iran in the region. So one of the sort of geopolitical issues that be ongoing is whether or not they could scupper that particular alliance from building up from there. And that perhaps links back to who are the paymasters of Hamas. You know, indubitably, the connections they are with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, but also behind them is Iran. And Iran has got no interest whatsoever in Israel and Saudi Arabia making a peace settlement, quite the opposite. And so if they could do something to scupper that, that's what they would do. But there's one other factor as well, which is kind of psychological thing. One of these things that we've dealt with before, we were doing some of the ISIS and the Daesh terrorists, is this whole thing about shaheed, or martyrdom. You know, in their view, it doesn't matter if they die or you kill other people, because they are going to be martyrs, and martyrs go straight to heaven. You know, and that's a different kind of perspective from dealing with an enemy who, if you like, is a representative of your state or opposition state, you know, who is doing his duty, and maybe what you want him to do, but he's doing his duty, but doesn't necessarily have a personal interest in martyrdom, but they don't really care.
Tell us about the involvement, the influence of Iran. Iran are the paymasters, and some people say the puppet masters of Hamas. Hamas don't do anything that Iran doesn't tell them to do. Would Iran have ordered this attack in the light of, shall we say, the thawing of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia? They didn't want to see this. Is Iran to blame for what happened?
No, I think Iran to blame is I think it's a bit more diffuse than that. I mean, I think it's a sense that what Iran does is it supports its proxies. It supports Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. It supported the Houthis in the southern Yemen and the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, and supported Hamas. It enables them, it trains them, it gives them intelligence, it gives them some guidance and some help. It will probably leave the detail of when they conduct the execution of an operation to themselves. So they're not in the sense of a direct military command. There is some information coming in that there was a meeting on Monday of last week where basically the Iranians were briefed on this and gave the go-ahead. But that's very much single source reporting at the moment. So, I mean, that's probably more speculation than anything else. So, I mean, I think the Iranians would certainly have said, yes, go ahead and do this. But it's not necessarily in the sense of them be directly ordering it, because then if it was them directly ordering it, then they'd also be in a position to be told to stop it, to hand over the hostages, and everything goes with that. And I think they've given themselves that little bit of arm's length distance from the detailed operations.
Yeah, sorry to labour this point, but it's still going on in Gaza. It's like watching a war film live, explosions going off as you speak, Simon. At what point, I mean, do you fear, I was just talking to Mark Almond, and he says the danger here is that this conflict could expand. It could spill out of Israel, out of the Gaza Strip, out of Lebanon even, to a wider Middle Eastern conflict. Is that a fear? Is that a worry?
I think that's a very, very wise worry, to be honest. And indeed, you've had people like Benjamin Netanyahu talking about remaking the Middle East. So he's clearly thinking that something dramatic has to happen as a result of this. That it's not just a matter of going back to a kind of ceasefire, because there's been many, many ceasefires between the Israelis and Hamas over the years, none of which Hamas have actually kept to. But he's talking about something like that. But just like the Yom Kippur War, which brought in the Americans, brought in the Russians, brought in other sort of proxy powers, there is always the danger in the Middle East that the conflict can spill over and create greater tensions elsewhere. So that's a very real worry.
We heard today that America is sending ships. It stands with Israel. Britain stands with Israel. But again, I'm really sorry to labour this point, Simon, but you should see what's going on in Gaza right now. It's extraordinary. But America is obviously tacitly getting involved. Rishi Sunak has said we stand with Israel. I mean, what about this increasing involvement of the international community? I mean, this is extremely disturbing. The world is on a kind of knife edge here, isn't it?
No, it is, but I mean, they can be used for do some useful stuff as well. I mean, most of there are very strong sanctions against Iran in terms of transporting and moving weapons. So what the US are able to do is conduct kind of policing operations in the Eastern Mediterranean to stop shipments of weapons and ammunition, etc., getting across into Hamas's hands. That's got to be good. It's also a cause of reassurance to Israel itself that America stands with them and stands behind them, and that was also important. Again, going back to the Yom Kippur War, when basically Kissinger made quite clear to everybody they would continue to supply the Israelis whatever they needed for as long as they needed, until basically they could achieve some kind of ceasefire. So I think it's a very strong political statement by the Americans. And in the meantime, as well as I said, they could do some useful work in stopping arms and ammunition being shipped into Hamas' hands.
One last question to you, Simon. What went wrong with Israeli intelligence? Israeli Mossad, renowned to be the greatest intelligence service on the face of the planet, apparently, it did not have a clue about this attack on the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Netanyahu catching a lot of flack from his people who were furious. What on earth went wrong?
I think it's really interesting. I think that there's two things. One is, that's part of what the commission afterwards, we try to understand it, because it's ongoing. Because at the moment, do we really understand what Hamas's plans are? Do we understand what Hezbollah's plans are? Do we understand what Iran's plans are? So it's not just a matter of kind of, if you like, Royal Commission equivalent conversation after the event and the political consequences thereof. It's also understanding what's happening at the moment. What went wrong? My suspicion, but it's only suspicion, is the last year has been a year of complete turmoil inside Israel. And while the kind of organizations and structures and the formal structures of passive information may well have been there, the level of trust and that kind of just habit of people working and talking together and working closely together may well have been lost. And it would be very interesting to know whether it was that, if you like, the change in the culture as a result of the political turmoil meant that the intelligence agencies weren't looking in the right direction, or somebody had a vital bit of information and for whatever reason it wasn't passed on, whereas if they've been working more closely together, more effectively, that did happen as well. I will just, if I may very briefly say, given that, if you look at the three strategic shocks we've had, the Yom Kippur War, 9/11, and now this one, I mean, where were our intelligence agencies? Given the involvement of Iran, given the, and the concern about Iran, where were we looking? Because I'm not sure that it's quite right to say what happened in Israel. I'm quite interested to know what happened with our intelligence apparatus, and what they would do.
At these key moments, of course, the Israelis now calling this attack their 9/11. Very worrying, very dramatic scenes, and excellent to talk to you, Simon. Thank you very much for your time, Colonel Simon Diggins.